When we watch stories of resilience and new beginnings, we reflect, awaken, and may take steps that help us become happier and more fulfilled. I hope you enjoy this story of renewal, feel inspired by it, and join us. The fluorescent lights above Claire Bennett flickered like tired stars. Her fingers clawed at the hospital sheet as if it could pull air into her lungs. Somewhere close, a monitor screamed a rhythm that didn't sound like her life. A nurse called her name, but it arrived through water, slow and distant. Claire tried to answer, and only panic came out. She was 50, and she had always been careful with everything. Careful with food, careful with money, careful with opinions that could bruise someone. Careful with her job at the insurance office, where every form had a right box. Careful with her marriage, where silence was easier than a messy truth. Careful, like careful could buy her time. Now, time felt like a rug yanked out from under her ribs. The doctor's lips moved, and she caught words like acute and unstable, and now. A cold mask pressed over her face, smelling of plastic and old breath. Her chest rose, then stalled, like a car trying to start in winter. Claire thought, absurdly, that she hadn't even washed her hair today. In the blur, she saw her husband Mark at the doorway. His expression tried to be solid, but fear kept leaking out around the edges. He raised a hand, not quite a wave, not quite a promise, just a trembling sign. Claire wanted to tell him she was sorry for every conversation she postponed, but the room tilted, and her apology stayed trapped behind her teeth. A memory flashed: her mother folding towels with military precision. "Don't make trouble, Claire," her mother would say, like trouble was contagious. Claire learned early that good girls did not take up space with need or noise. She carried that lesson into adulthood like a small, heavy stone in her pocket. Now the stone felt useless, because her body was making plenty of trouble. The doctor asked her to rate her pain, and she almost laughed. How do you rate the feeling of your life slipping out through a crack you can't see? She tried to think of the last time she felt truly alive, truly awake. Her mind offered a blank hallway, the kind she walked every morning at work. The emptiness was more frightening than the machines. When the medication hit, the edges of the room softened. Claire drifted, but she didn't feel peace, only the strange shame of being helpless. As she sank, one thought clung to her like a burr on fabric. If this was the end, she had been a woman who waited for later, and she had no idea where later had gone. Claire woke to a hush that felt too clean to be real. The oxygen line hissed beside her cheek like a whisper she couldn't answer. Her throat tasted metallic, and her tongue felt thick with sleep. A dull ache sat under her sternum, steady as a warning light. She blinked and waited for gratitude to arrive. It didn't come. Not at first. Not even as minutes passed. What came was a cold awareness that she was still here against her own expectations. A nurse smiled and said, "You gave us a scare," like it was almost a joke. Claire tried to smile back, but her face refused to perform. She felt like an actress who had forgotten her lines. Mark sat in a chair by the window, his jacket draped over his arm. He looked up fast, relief flooding him so hard it made his eyes shine. "Thank God," he said, squeezing her fingers like he could anchor her to the bed. Claire watched his hands, noticing the tiny tremor he always hid at home. She realized she didn't know what to say to comfort him. The doctor returned with careful words and careful pauses. He explained the episode, the risk, the tests still pending, the need for changes. Claire nodded like she always nodded, obedient, cooperative, easy to manage. Inside, something darker spoke up. "So this is what my life amounts to. A folder, a list, a plan, and everyone telling me to be good." When Mark stepped out to call their daughter, Claire stared at the ceiling tiles. Each tile had tiny holes, like 1,000 little exits she couldn't take. She thought of her friends from work bringing casseroles if she died. She thought of sympathy cards with neat handwriting and predictable phrases. The image made her stomach twist with a grief that didn't have a name. A social worker asked about her support system, and Claire almost lied. She wanted to say she had everything she needed, because that was her habit. But the truth sat in her chest heavier than the heart monitor's clips. She had people around her, yes, but she often felt alone, in plain sight. She lived like a house with the lights on, and the doors locked from the inside. That night, while the hallway dimmed and machines hummed, she whispered to herself, "I'm alive," she said, expecting it to feel like a gift. Instead, it felt like a question that demanded an answer she didn't have. If she survived this, what exactly was she returning to? And why did the thought of going back make her more afraid than the diagnosis? Home smelled like lemon cleaner and the life she used to manage. Claire stepped inside slowly, the front door heavier than she remembered. Her suitcase bumped the threshold, and she winced like the sound could break her. Mark hovered behind her, offering help with every small movement. Claire nodded, then hated herself for needing him. In the bathroom, she faced the mirror under the harsh vanity light. Her skin looked paler, and her eyes looked older in a way sleep couldn't fix. She lifted her shirt and saw the faint bruises from needles and adhesive pads. The marks were small, but they felt like a new language written on her body. She whispered, "Who are you now?" as if her reflection might answer. The house was quiet in the afternoon, too quiet for someone freshly spared. A neighbor's lawnmower droned outside, and the ordinary sound felt insulting. Claire sat on the couch and listened to her own breathing like it was someone else's. She tried to read, then tried to watch television, then tried to nap. Nothing held her attention because her mind kept circling the same raw thought. She remembered the last decade like a film played on low volume. Work, grocery lists, birthdays, bills, polite dinners, polite arguments, polite forgiveness. She had been proud of her reliability, proud of never causing trouble. Now that pride tasted stale, like bread left out too long. She wondered how many days she had spent simply getting through. Mark cooked soup and set it in front of her like an offering. He watched her take each spoonful, his worry filling the space between them. "Just focus on healing," he said, and she heard a hidden plea beneath it. He wanted the old Claire back, the one who didn't ask hard questions. Claire felt guilty for already missing a version of herself she didn't even like. That evening, she walked to the bedroom closet and opened it. Rows of the same safe colors stared back at her navy gray, beige, permission. Her hand drifted to a dress she once bought for someday, still with tags. She remembered how she'd laughed and said she'd wear it when she felt confident. Now she wondered if confidence was something you practiced, not something you waited for. Before sleep, she scrolled old photos on her phone with trembling fingers. There she was at 30, laughing too loudly at a cookout, sunlight in her hair. There she was at 40, holding a cake, smiling politely while her eyes looked tired. At 50, in a hospital bed, photo Mark had taken, she looked like a stranger. Claire set the phone down and felt a longing she couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. 2 weeks later, Claire returned to the insurance office for a short visit. The elevator smelled like coffee and carpet shampoo, exactly like it always had. Her coworkers hugged her carefully, as if she might crack like glass. Someone said, "You're so lucky," and Claire nodded like luck was the whole story. Inside, she felt a quiet rage that scared her. Her desk waited with its neat stacks and labeled folders. The computer screen blinked awake, offering the comfort of routine. For years she had believed routine meant stability, and stability meant safety. Now the safety felt like a padded room, soft enough to forget the outside existed. Claire sat down and realized she couldn't breathe in here either. At lunch, she tried to join the break room chatter. People joked about weekend plans, complained about traffic, swapped diet tips and TV shows. Claire laughed in the right places, then drifted into silence when no one noticed. She looked at her hands and thought, "I have built a life that needs nothing from me. And if it needs nothing from me, why does it feel like it's swallowing me?" That night at home, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were old notebooks from college, pages filled with messy sketches and poem fragments. She ran her fingers over the paper and felt something spark, then ache. She remembered wanting to study art history, wanting to travel, wanting to make things. Then she remembered hearing, "That's not practical," and believing it was love. Mark found her sitting on the floor with the notebooks spread around her. He smiled gently and said, "I forgot you used to draw," as if it were a cute fact. Claire wanted to scream that she hadn't forgotten, she had buried it to be acceptable. Instead she said, "I don't know why I stopped," and her voice sounded thin. Mark shrugged, not cruelly, but with the ease of someone who never had to shrink. Later, she drove to the grocery store alone, just to feel motion. The parking lot lights cast long shadows, and cold air stung her cheeks awake. She walked the aisles and noticed how she always bought the same brands, the same meals. It hit her that she ate like someone who never expected to be delighted. She stood by the fruit and realized she didn't remember what she even liked. On the way home, she passed a community center with a banner in the window. Adult classes, painting, writing, beginners photography. The banner announced in bright letters. Claire slowed the car, her heart beating faster than it should for a simple sign. She told herself it was silly, that she should just go home and rest, but her hands tightened on the steering wheel, because something inside her didn't want to turn away. If this story touched you in any way, let us know in the comments. Claire sat in her car across from the community center, engine off, hands cold. The banner fluttered slightly in the heating vent's breath whenever the door opened. People went in smiling, carrying tote bags, living like life was not a waiting room. Claire watched them like they belonged to a different species. Her chest tightened, and it wasn't the medical kind of tightness. She tried to name the fear, to make it smaller with language. It wasn't fear of collapsing again, though that shadow still followed her. It was fear of being seen trying, fear of failing loudly, fear of wanting something. For 50 years she had practiced being low maintenance, grateful, fine. Now fine felt like a lie she had memorized too well. At home, she told Mark she was tired and went to the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall where their wedding photo hung. The couple in the photo looked hopeful, like they believed life would automatically become meaningful. Claire touched the frame and felt the distance between that hope and her current silence. She wondered if Mark would still love her if she stopped being easy. The next morning, her daughter Elise called from Chicago. Elise's voice was bright with concern, filling the speaker with forced optimism. "Mom, just rest," Elise insisted. "Don't stress about anything right now." Claire swallowed and almost agreed, because agreement was her reflex. Then she heard herself say, "Resting is all I've done for years." The line went quiet, and the quiet was heavy but honest. Elise asked, "What do you mean?" And Claire's throat burned with unsaid years. She wanted to explain how she'd been present but not alive, stable but not fulfilled. But the words felt too big, like trying to hold an ocean in a teacup. So she said, "I think I need to change." And her voice shook like a first step. That afternoon, she returned to the community center, heart pounding, palms damp. She walked to the door, then stopped, hearing her mother's old warning in her head. "Don't make trouble. Don't be dramatic. Don't act like you matter more than others." Claire pressed her hand to the glass and felt her own reflection staring back. She realized she was not afraid of death as much as she was afraid of her own life. She didn't go in yet. Not that day. Not all the way. But she copied the class schedule into her phone with trembling determination. In the parking lot, she whispered, "I don't want to go back," as if confessing a sin. The words landed, and instead of shame, she felt a small, stubborn heat. For the first time since the hospital, she sensed that surviving had handed her a choice. Claire woke before dawn, the house still wrapped in dark quiet. The heater clicked on, and warm air moved through the vents like a slow sigh. She lay still, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside her. Her heart beat too loudly for such an ordinary morning. She realized she was waiting for permission that would never arrive. In the kitchen, she made coffee and stood by the window. Outside, frost glazed the grass, and the street lamp painted everything pale gold. She opened the Notes app on her phone and stared at the class schedule again. Her thumb hovered over the enroll link like it was a cliff edge. Then she whispered, "Just one," and tapped before she could back out. The confirmation email chimed, small and cheerful, and her stomach flipped. It felt ridiculous to be scared of a beginner painting class at 50. But the fear wasn't about paint. She knew that, not really. It was about stepping into a room where nobody knew her as reliable Claire. A room where she might be seen as someone still becoming later. She walked around the block for the first time alone. The air was sharp, smelling of pine and distant chimney smoke. Her legs trembled, not only from weakness, but from the unfamiliar act of choosing. A dog barked behind a fence, and she startled, then laughed at herself. Even her laughter sounded new, like it had dust on it. At the mailbox, she found a pile of get-well cards and insurance statements. One envelope held a hospital bill that made her throat tighten instantly. Old panic tried to rise, the kind that said, "Stay safe, don't change, don't risk." Claire sat on the porch steps and breathed through it slowly. She told herself, "I can be careful and still be alive." That evening, Mark asked what she did all day. Claire almost said, "Nothing much," because that was the answer that kept peace. Instead, she said, "I enrolled in a class," and she watched his face closely. A flicker of surprise crossed him, quickly replaced by a smile he tried to make supportive. "Good," he said, but the word sounded like it was balancing on an edge. She went to bed with nerves buzzing under her skin. The ceiling fan turned slowly, pushing shadows around the room. Claire held on to the small victory like a match in the dark. She hadn't changed her whole life, not yet, not even close. But for the first time, she had moved without asking her fear for permission. The first painting class was on a Tuesday night, and the sun set early. Claire sat in the parking lot again, hands gripping the steering wheel. The building glowed warm through its windows, and she could hear muffled laughter. Her chest tightened with the old instinct to turn around. Then she remembered the hospital lights and forced herself to step out. Inside, the room smelled of acrylic paint and paper towels. A woman with silver hair greeted her, handing her a name tag and a brush. Claire wrote Claire in block letters, too careful, too controlled. She took a seat near the back, like she was apologizing with her posture. When she dipped her brush into water, her hand shook, and she hated that it did. The instructor said, "There are no mistakes, only choices," and Claire almost cried. She painted a simple sky, blue layered over white, uneven at the edges. Her mind kept demanding perfection, demanding proof she deserved to be there. But the paint didn't obey her rules, and that felt strangely freeing. For an hour, she forgot to be the woman who always got it right. When she got home, Mark was watching television with the volume low. He looked at her painting like it was a souvenir from a strange trip. "That's nice," he said, then added, "Just don't overdo it, okay?" His concern sounded reasonable, loving even, but it landed like a leash. Claire nodded, then felt anger bloom under her ribs. The next day, her coworker Janet called and said, "You're not coming back full-time, right?" Claire heard worry wrapped in gossip, like a gift with sharp corners. "Take it easy," Janet advised. "You don't want to trigger another episode." Claire thanked her, because Claire always thanked people, even when they boxed her in. After the call, she stared at her hands and felt her own life shrinking again. At her follow-up appointment, the cardiologist praised her for being compliant. The word made her skin prickle, though she smiled politely anyway. He talked about stress management, diet, moderation, avoiding extremes. Claire wanted to ask, "What if my whole life has been avoidance?" But she swallowed it, afraid of sounding dramatic, afraid of being difficult. That night, she sat at the kitchen table and looked at her painting. The sky was imperfect, streaked in places, but it held a softness she didn't expect. Claire realized everyone around her wanted the version of her that stayed predictable. They loved her caution because it made them feel safe too. And the hardest part of changing, she understood, was disappointing the people who preferred her smaller. Insomnia came back like an old acquaintance that knew where she lived. Claire lay in the dark, listening to the ticking clock and Mark's breathing. Her mind wandered, restless, pulling drawers open in her memory. She thought of the notebooks again, the sketches, the words she used to write, and then, like a hand on her shoulder, a forgotten dream returned. She remembered being 22 in a museum in Philadelphia. A painting of a woman on a shoreline had stopped her like a spell. The colors were simple, but the feeling in them was loud and human. Claire had stood there thinking, "I want to make something that does that. Not just a picture, but a presence, a truth someone could feel." Back then, she'd told a professor she wanted to study art history. The professor had smiled and said she had the eye, the sensitivity for it. Claire had carried that praise like a bright coin in her pocket for weeks. Then her father said, "That's not a career," and Mark, her boyfriend, then had agreed. Claire had nodded, and the coin had gone dull. In the morning, she opened her closet and pulled out the dress with the tags. She held it up, the fabric soft and hopeful, and felt a sudden ache. It wasn't about the dress. It was about the woman who bought it. The woman who believed someday was a real place you could arrive at. Claire pressed the fabric to her cheek and let herself grieve the years. At the next class, the instructor asked everyone to paint something they missed. People chose childhood homes, a lost pet, a favorite vacation spot. Claire stared at her blank paper and felt her throat tighten. What she missed was not a place, but a version of herself that hadn't learned to disappear. She painted a small open door, light spilling through, and her hands shook the whole time. After class, the silver-haired woman introduced herself as Marisol. Marisol said, "That door feels like a beginning," and Claire's eyes stung instantly. Claire laughed nervously and said, "I don't even know what I'm beginning." Marisol nodded like she understood and replied, "Sometimes you start before you understand." That sentence followed Claire home like a lantern she didn't know she needed. That night, Claire pulled out her old notebooks and opened to a page of half-finished lines. The handwriting looked younger, messier, braver, like it didn't ask permission to exist. She read the words and felt warmth and shame at the same time. She whispered, "I'm sorry," not to Mark, not to her parents, but to herself. And in the silence after the apology, she felt the dream breathing, still alive, still waiting. It started with a flutter in her chest on a Wednesday morning. Claire was pouring cereal when her heartbeat stumbled, then raced. The spoon clinked against the bowl, loud as a warning bell. Her vision narrowed slightly, and the old hospital fear surged up fast. For a moment, she was back under fluorescent lights, helpless and small. She sat down slowly, pressing a hand to her sternum. Mark rushed in at the sound of the bowl sliding on the counter. "Claire," he said, panic sharpening his voice. "Are you okay?" She wanted to say yes, because yes was the word that kept everyone calm. But the truth was, she didn't know. And not knowing felt like falling. They ended up at urgent care, the waiting room smelling of disinfectant and anxiety. A television played a daytime show nobody watched, its laughter canned and distant. Claire filled out forms with trembling hands, checking boxes like her life depended on them. When the nurse called her name, Claire stood too quickly and felt dizzy. She hated how easily her body could steal her courage. The tests showed nothing catastrophic, just irregularities, probably stress, the doctor said. Stress, like her entire existence, wasn't built on swallowing herself to keep peace. The doctor advised rest, hydration, less activity, until her next cardiology visit. Mark exhaled and looked at Claire like this proved she'd been reckless. Claire felt shame flood her, hot and immediate, as if wanting more had caused the scare. Back home, she sat on the couch and stared at the community center brochure. The colors looked suddenly childish, like a fantasy she wasn't allowed to touch. She thought, maybe everyone was right. Maybe I should just stop trying. The old life offered itself like a familiar blanket, heavy but predictable. Claire almost reached for it, because predictability felt like mercy. That evening Marisol texted her, asking if she was coming to class. Claire's fingers hovered over the screen, ready to type an excuse. Then she imagined herself at 70, looking back at this moment with regret like a stone. Her chest tightened again, but this time it was grief, not arrhythmia. She wrote, "I'm scared," and hit send before she could erase it. Marisol replied, "Me too, sometimes. Come anyway, even if you just watch." Claire read the message again and again, feeling something soften in her. She realized setbacks weren't proof she should stop. They were part of learning to live. Still, the fear didn't leave. It sat beside her like an unwanted guest, and Claire understood the next step would not be about health alone, but about choosing herself while afraid. On Friday morning, Claire woke with a quiet decision already forming. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't announce itself with certainty. It felt more like a hand reaching for hers in the dark. She sat up slowly and listened to her heartbeat, steady enough for now. Then she whispered, "I'm going," as if making a vow to her own life. Mark noticed her getting dressed in something other than sweatpants. He watched her with cautious eyes, the kind people use around fragile things. "Do you really think that's a good idea?" he asked, trying to sound gentle. Claire felt the familiar pull to reassure him, to shrink so he wouldn't worry. But something in her was tired of performing safety. She took a breath and said, "I can't live like I'm already gone." The sentence startled them both, hanging in the air like a truth with sharp edges. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it, as if he didn't know how to argue with that. Claire's hands trembled, but she didn't take the words back. For the first time, she chose honesty over harmony. At the community center, she walked in without sitting in the parking lot first. The hallway smelled like paint and coffee, warm and imperfect and human. In the classroom, she set her bag down and felt her shoulders drop slightly. Marisol smiled at her like she had been expected, not like she was a burden. Claire realized how rare it was to feel welcomed without conditions. The instructor offered a new prompt, "Paint what you want to become." Claire stared at the blank page, the white space daring her to be specific. Her old instinct said, "Don't want too much. Don't set yourself up for disappointment." But her brush moved anyway, guided by a feeling she didn't fully understand. She painted a woman standing in sunlight, not hiding, not apologizing, simply present. Halfway through, her heart fluttered again, and fear shot through her like electricity. Claire paused, set her brush down, and placed a hand on her chest. The room didn't spin, the walls didn't close in, and nobody panicked. Marisol leaned over and whispered, "Breathe with me," and they did, slow and steady. Claire realized she didn't have to run from every sensation anymore. When she left class, dusk had settled, turning the sky the color of worn velvet. Claire sat in her car and looked at her painting on the passenger seat. It wasn't masterpiece level, but it was hers, and it existed because she had chosen it. She felt a strange pride, quiet and solid, like a new bone forming. And as she drove home, she understood something important had shifted, even if everything else was still uncertain. Claire began to notice her body in new ways, subtle and honest, not as an enemy waiting to betray her, but as a language she never learned. Each morning, she sat on the edge of the bed and checked in quietly. How fast was her breath, how heavy her chest, how loud her thoughts. This small ritual felt strange, but it grounded her before fear could speak. She stopped pushing herself to bounce back the way everyone expected. Instead, she moved slowly, respecting the days when energy came in whispers. A walk became about noticing trees, not counting steps or calories. Rest became an active choice, not a failure she needed to justify. For the first time, care felt like cooperation instead of control. At her next appointment, she told the cardiologist about her anxiety. Not the sanitized version, but the real one that lived under her ribs. The doctor listened longer this time, his tone softening as she spoke. He suggested therapy alongside medication, treating her mind as part of healing. Claire left the office lighter, surprised by the relief of being honest. She started seeing a therapist on Thursday afternoons. The room smelled faintly of lavender and oldbooks.com without being sterile. At first, Claire struggled to answer simple questions about what she wanted. She was fluent in responsibility, not desire, practiced in duty, not joy. Naming herself felt like learning a new alphabet at 50. Some days, fear still surged without warning, sharp and convincing. But instead of panicking, she learned to sit with it, breathe through it. She told herself, this feeling will pass. Even if it's loud right now. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped running the entire house. Claire realized strength could be quiet and still be real. At home, Mark noticed the changes, though neither of them named them yet. Claire spoke up more, asked for space when she needed it. She didn't apologize as quickly, didn't rush to smooth every discomfort. Mark looked confused sometimes, like the furniture had shifted overnight. Claire felt guilty, but also strangely aligned, like her spine was straightening. One evening, she stood in the shower and let the water run freely. She closed her eyes and felt gratitude rise, slow and unforced. Not gratitude for surviving, but gratitude for finally paying attention. Her body had spoken loudly because it had been ignored for too long. And now, she was listening. Without her old routines dominating every hour, days opened up awkwardly. Claire found herself with time that wasn't already assigned a purpose. At first, the openness felt unsettling, like standing in an empty room. She kept expecting someone to tell her what to do next, but no instructions came, and that was the point. She reduced her hours at work further, despite the financial anxiety. Saying the words out loud made her voice shake, but she didn't retreat. Her manager nodded, surprised but accommodating, as if expecting compliance. Claire walked out of the office feeling both terrified and powerful. The script she had followed for decades no longer fit. At the community center, she enrolled in a second class, this one writing. Sitting with a notebook again felt like reopening a sealed window. The instructor asked them to write about a moment that changed everything. Claire's pen hovered, then moved, pouring out hospital lights and silent fears. When she finished, her hands were shaking, but her chest felt open. She began to see patterns in her life with painful clarity. How often she had chosen peace over truth, safety over desire. How often she had mistaken endurance for virtue. These realizations hurt, but they also freed something inside her. Awareness became a tool, not a punishment. One afternoon, Elise visited from Chicago, bringing laughter and concern. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight warming the worn wood. Claire told her daughter about the classes, the therapy, the fear. Elise listened quietly, then reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I want you happy," Elise said, and Claire believed her. That night, Claire wrote a list titled, "Things I'm Allowed to Want." The list was short at first, hesitant, almost embarrassed. Time, creativity, honesty, space, joy, rest. She read the words aloud, and felt them settle into her bones. She was no longer waiting for permission to exist fully. Before bed, she looked at her reflection again, gentler this time. The woman staring back was still uncertain, still healing, still afraid, but she was no longer invisible to herself. Claire smiled, small but sincere, like greeting someone new, someone she was finally ready to become. Courage did not arrive with confidence or clarity. It arrived quietly, disguised as follow-through on uncomfortable choices. Claire kept showing up to class even when doubt whispered otherwise. She kept telling the truth even when her voice trembled. This was bravery without an audience. She shared one of her written pieces aloud for the first time. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought others could hear it. The words felt exposed, like skin without armor. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a breath too long. Then someone said, "That felt honest," and Claire almost cried. At home, conversations with Mark grew more complex. She expressed needs instead of assumptions, boundaries instead of resentment. Mark struggled at times, mourning the predictability he had relied on, but he also began to listen, really listen, not just wait for calm. Their marriage shifted from quiet survival to uncertain negotiation. One evening, Mark admitted he was afraid of losing her, not to death, but to change, to a version he didn't recognize. Claire took his hand and told him she had been lost already. "That's what almost killed me," she said softly. The truth landed between them, heavy but necessary. She noticed how often women around her apologized for taking space, in class, in stores, in conversations, shrinking by reflex. Claire caught herself before saying sorry and chose silence instead. The silence felt powerful, like standing her ground without raising her voice. Courage, she learned, didn't need volume. Physically she felt stronger, though not invincible. Her body still sent warnings, but they no longer controlled her decisions. She planned her days with intention, leaving room for rest and joy. Balance replaced the old extremes of control and neglect. Her life began to feel responsive instead of rigid. One afternoon, while painting alone, Claire smiled unexpectedly. The smile surprised her, rising without effort or explanation. She realized she trusted herself more than she ever had before. Not to be perfect, but to respond when life asked something of her. That trust felt like a quiet miracle. Fear never fully left, and Claire stopped waiting for it to. Instead, she learned how fear sounded when it lied. It spoke urgently, dramatically, insisting disaster was always imminent. Claire acknowledged it, then checked in with her breath and body. Most days, fear lost the argument. She agreed to display her paintings in a small community exhibit. The idea terrified her more than the hospital ever had. Standing beside her work felt like standing without armor. People paused, commented, asked questions, connected. Claire realized art created conversations she never knew how to start. Her therapist asked what success looked like now. Claire didn't mention promotions or stability or approval. She said, "Waking up and not feeling like I'm disappearing." The words felt solid, earned, like they belonged to her. Success had finally been redefined. At home, Mark surprised her by asking about her writing. Not politely, but with genuine curiosity. He read one of her pieces slowly, then set the paper down. "I didn't know you felt this way," he said quietly. Claire replied, "I didn't know how to say it before." They began couples counseling, clumsy and imperfect. Some sessions ended in frustration, others in small breakthroughs. They learned how much silence had shaped their marriage. They learned change could be shared, not just endured. Hope returned, cautious but real. Claire's health stabilized, not cured, but manageable. She accepted this with maturity instead of resentment. The body she had fought for years was now her partner. Together, they negotiated limits and possibilities. That cooperation felt like peace. One night, she sat outside under a wide, quiet sky. Stars blinked faintly, indifferent and beautiful. Claire breathed deeply, feeling fear still present, but no longer dominant. She understood fear would always walk with her, but it would not choose her direction anymore. On her 51st birthday, Claire woke before the alarm. Sunlight crept into the room, gentle and unannounced. She lay still, hand on her chest, listening to her steady breath. The sound felt like an agreement between her and the day. She smiled without needing a reason. She spent the morning painting, not for class or display, just for herself, letting color move where it wanted. Her brush followed instinct instead of instruction. The result didn't matter. The act did. Creation became a form of conversation. Friends and family gathered that evening, laughter filling the house. Claire moved among them with ease she didn't recognize before. She wasn't hosting out of obligation, but out of presence. When someone asked how she was feeling, she answered honestly. I'm living, she said, and meant it. Later, when the house quieted, she stepped outside alone. The air was cool, carrying the scent of night flowers. She thought about the hospital, the fear, the old waiting version of herself. She felt compassion instead of regret. That woman had survived long enough for this one to exist. Claire understood now that rebeginning was not a single moment. It was a practice, renewed daily through attention and courage. She would still falter, still doubt, still feel afraid, but she would no longer disappear to make life easier. That decision was permanent. Inside, Mark was washing dishes, humming softly. Claire watched him and felt gratitude mixed with realism. Their future wasn't guaranteed, but it was honest. She preferred uncertainty with truth to safety with silence. That choice felt like freedom. As she turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, Claire paused. She placed a hand over her heart, steady and warm. She whispered, "I'm here, to no one and to everything." The words settled deep, anchoring her to the present. For the first time, her life felt like it had truly begun. If you made it to the end, thank you, truly. If you're already subscribed, thank you for being here. If you're not yet, stay with us. And if this video touched you, share, leave a like or a comment. I read every single one.